Thanks, Julian, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My pleasure to be here, and again, thanks to Julian for the invitation. It's also good to catch up with some familiar faces I haven't seen for a few years. Look, what I'd like to take you through today, I'm going to talk about a very quick overview of Glencore and a very quick discussion on the state of the industry, but my main focus is really going to be on the global outlook for energy and the role that coal will play in that, how there is a solution for coal in a lower carbon world, and also talk about Glencore's commitment in the area of sustainable development. So firstly, quickly about Glencore. As most people in this room would know, Glencore and Xstrata merged in May 2003, creating one of the world's largest global diversified natural resource companies. A lot of people may not know, but because of its commodities trading, it's actually ranked number 12 on the Fortune Global 500 with $214 billion of revenue. Some fast facts. Around 200,000 people employed globally, 150 mining and metallurgical sites, and located in 50 countries. This is our global operations. I'll just read the commodities out. Ferroalloys, that's vanadium and chromium, nickel, zinc, alumina, copper, coal, iron ore, oil and agriculture. So quite diverse, and we distinguish ourselves from some of the other majors by that spread of commodities. In terms of our industrial assets, our producing operations, we obviously have a presence in Australia that I'll go into in a little bit more detail. But if you look at particularly South America, Chile, Peru, Argentina, copper, nickel. In Colombia, we have two coal operations, Cerrejón and the Prodeco operation, some operations in Northern America, in Canada, and in Africa, coal and ferroalloys operations in South Africa, and substantial copper operations in the copper belt, Zambia and Congo. And in Kazakhstan, we have a very large zinc operation. Something that I think is worth pointing out is that Glencore predated Xstrata in Australia and goes back 15 years. If you have a look, back in 1998, the acquisition of Murrin Murrin, or certainly an interest in Murrin Murrin, acquisition of Cumnock Coal, Mount Owen, followed by West Wallsend, the Cobar mine in 99, along with Liddell United, Bulga operations in 2000, Liddell, Ravensworth, Narama, Cook. All of those predated the Xstrata IPO, and quite a lot of people, particularly in the coal department, including myself, actually worked for Glencore before the Xstrata IPO. But subsequent to the Xstrata IPO, acquisition of Mount Isa, acquisitions of Jubilee in Australia, and some substantial expansions, including places like Rolleston and elsewhere. And more recently, the acquisition of Claremont. In Australia, in New South Wales, predominantly coal operations, although we do have the Cobar copper operation. We are the largest producer in New South Wales of coal, about 30%, and the next closest to us is 20%. Across Australia, we are the largest producer of coal now after the acquisition of Claremont. So we have operations in the Bowen Basin as well. We have obviously our copper operations out of Mount Isa, copper and zinc, the Mount MacArthur River zinc operation and nickel operations in WA. But more importantly, we have grain operations here, particularly big presence in South Australia. We are the buyer of grain. We're not the producer of it. Obviously, we're the middle person buying off the farmers. Why is there no shortage of bad news? I mean, there would be a person in this room that's not aware of the difficult circumstances, the challenging circumstances in particularly the coal industry and other industries, mining at the moment. You can see the Queensland Times has estimated there's been about 16,000 jobs lost directly in the coal industry, and if you look at the multiplier effect, which is probably in the order of at least 3, a substantial loss of jobs in this current downturn. This price graph, in very simple terms, explains when you see that thermal coal has come from prices in the high 120s down to current prices that are actually less than $70 out of Newcastle at the moment. Similarly, hard coking coal, heady prices of over $300 and current spot prices of $110. We estimate there's more than a third of Australian coal operations running at a loss. It is a challenging time, a combination of low prices, high Australian dollar and high input costs that grew during the boom have put enormous pressure on our operations. I think the most significant pressure for many years. This is a slide out of our first half results that was put up. It's available on the website if anyone wants to go to the Glencore website. There are other slides that talk about Glencore's view of what's happening in a number of commodities. I mean, the interesting thing is that supply is still rising and demand is still rising. And however, there is an oversupply situation at the moment. And in time, as there's less investment into new projects, that will ultimately correct. The main thing I want to talk about is world energy demand and coal's role in that. And as the world population grows from 7 to 9 billion by 2050, the world is going to need enormous amounts of energy. And I'll explain to you why shortly. Firstly, when you look at the demographics and consider, and I know this slide's a little bit out of date, but it's probably not that far off the mark, of over 450 million people in India under the age of 15, roughly 350 in China, and 123 million in Nigeria, there's going to be a growing demand from the changing demographics. But I think this slide is particularly interesting if you focus on, just under the graph, the share of population in the share of population in consuming class and the percentage of that that's changed over time. And if you look in 2010, there was about 2.4 billion had moved into the consuming class. And consuming class is defined as people having a disposable income to spend on discretionary goods of more than $10 a day. That will increase by 1.8 billion between now and 2025. And again, if you look at this slide, and you just focus on the countries to the top right-hand corner, the United States, Germany, UK, all of our OECD countries, where the urban population is sitting around that 80 to 90 percentile. And if you have a look at United States, back in 1820, they had an urban population of around less than 10%. And it's taken all that time to get there. But if you focus on India at the moment, India's urban population is around 30%, and China's just now, right now, moving to 50%. So equally, with that shift urban population to urban population, it's also characterised by an increase in the per capita GDP. However, world energy poverty is a huge issue. There are 3 billion people who rely on biomass or animal dung for cooking or heating. The task of gathering fuel often falls mainly to women and children, often carrying 50 kilo up to 10 kilometres a day, as that bottom photograph shows you. Rudimentary stoves burning traditional biomass produce black soot, leading to an estimated premature 3.5 million deaths per annum, which is second only to water and sanitation premature deaths. I'm not sure how many people noticed what came out of the Copenhagen Accord in 2009, but it highlighted the need to balance the objectives of addressing climate change and eradicating poverty in the developed world. These things are inextricably linked. And just to emphasise that, and mainly focus on the 2030 columns, that still in 2030 in Africa and sub-Saharan Africa, there will be still 645 million people who do not have access to electricity. But contrast that to the situation in China. China is forecast to have almost 0 people who don't have access to electricity. If you go to the right-hand side and look at the 230 column, there will still be, in 2030, 1.5 billion people in Asia who do not have access to clean cooking facilities. What does that mean? Well, the IEA has projected world energy demand will continue to grow. And if you look at that, oil and coal will still have a role. They will still grow, but more steadily. I must emphasise, this is their new policy scenario. This is a scenario that says governments will put in policies around prices on carbon. It is not the current policy scenario which says business as usual from where we are today. So it actually does build into the fact that there will be agreements reached around global cohesion in reduction of greenhouse gases. But you can see the gas, biomass, renewables will obviously make a much greater increase from a much lower base. However, predicted growth in primary energy by country, you can see there that China, India and other Asia are enormous drivers. China and India make up at least 50% of the energy demand growth between now and 2035. And if you look at the bottom, OECD, all those countries that already have 80-90% urbanisation are going to remain relatively flat because they've been through their urbanisation period. However, in Southeast Asia, the power sector is fundamental to the energy outlook. And this, coming out of IEA, the World Energy Outlook, is forecasting that coal will have to continue to play a role. And that's despite even the forecast in 2030 of all those people still not having access to affordable electricity. But renewables and gas will also grow significantly. I think what this slide, and I've got to thank Wood Mackenzie for this, when you look at the analysis, there's going to be a continuing contribution on that left-hand graph of coal, and predominantly in the power sector in China. At the moment, China's producing somewhere in the order of almost 4 billion tonne of coal. And by 2035, that's forecast to grow a mere 2 billion tonne to 6 billion. But if you look on the right-hand side, it does show that coal in the power sector will actually continue to grow, but its contribution will not be as large. That in actual fact, when you look at renewables, they will more than double. So you can see the rate of growth in renewables during that period, and nuclear, but coal will still continue to grow. We're not going to see what happened in the US happening in Asia. The IEA is saying displacing coal in Asia will not be easy. The price differential of roughly $4 per million BTU for coal will not be displaced with gas in that arena being somewhere up around the $12 to $16. But you need a carbon price, as the right-hand side is showing, somewhere up around $140 a tonne to have that displacement occur. The interesting thing about all this, and I've highlighted Australia, when I speak to people and I say, how much of the world's coal production do you think Australia makes or produces, I would be lucky if I get 1 in 20 people who can tell me that it's less than 10% or around that 6%. 6% of the world coal production. We are the second largest exporter of coal, but we're not the largest. One of our major competitors, or our main competitor, sits just to the north of us in Indonesia. So for Australia to be able to take advantage of this enormous opportunity that will be there for coal in the longer term, despite the tough, challenging time we have at the moment, Australia is going to have to be competitive. But if I can just remind people, in Australia, our export revenue earners, number one is iron ore at $70 billion in 2013. Number two is coal, $40 billion. And the next, we have to drop down to $15 billion, almost a third of what coal is, where we find education, LNG, gold, the next contributors. So both coal and iron ore are extremely important to Australia's export revenue earnings. I want to move on, and there wouldn't be anyone anyone in this audience who doesn't know that there's a significant climate change challenge. And in actual fact, with coal, there are solutions. Like all things, they will cost. However, one of the near-term solutions is actually having more efficient power stations. The average thermal efficiency worldwide at the moment is around that 30-odd%, somewhere between 30 and 32%. In the EU, it's more like 38%. So you drop from around 1,100 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour down to 880 just by having a more efficient power station. If you go to ultra supercritical, it drops down even further to 740, and there's a view that we can get to 50% thermal efficiency. Can I just remind people that gas does not emit zero emissions. It emits emissions in the order of 450 to 550. So if we do get down to ultra supercritical, we are getting closer. But the long-term opportunity comes from carbon capture and storage, which I'll talk about more in a moment. I'll just give you one example of where in Japan, and by the way, Japan's thermal efficiencies tend to average in the order of 43, 44%. This is a repowering of the Isogo coal-fired power plant, commissioned in 1967, and you can see in the table at the bottom how both the efficiency and the SOx NOx emissions by upgrading that to an ultra supercritical, lowered all of the emissions and improved the thermal efficiency and has reduced the amount of CO2 per tonne. One of the remarkable things that I don't think is well understood is that the IEA is saying to reach 450 parts per million in the year 2050, we'll need 23% of reductions coming from renewables, but at the same time 17% coming from carbon capture and storage. Carbon capture and storage is not just about coal. It's about gas, and it's about industrial processes such as cement making and steel making and others. If you have any doubt, go to the IEA website and have a look. But it's saying to be able to reduce our global temperatures, 70% of the reduction in 2050 has to come from carbon capture and storage. And I know people say, well, that's not going to happen. I will tell you, it is happening, but it is happening at a much lower rate than either the IEA or anyone else would like to happen. But if you would like to know one reason, then maybe this might explain it. Last year, there was $250 billion spent on renewables. In the last 10 years, there's $20 billion spent on CCS. Yet, as you can see, the expectation from CCS is quite large. If we don't have CCS, it'll cost trillions more to get to that 450 parts per million. And that's because, goes back to the story I was trying to explain earlier about this demand for energy. Carbon capture and storage involves capturing the CO2 out of the flue gas and then burying it 2,000 metres at pressure into sedimentary storage locations not dissimilar to those where oil and gas come from. This is where IEA is saying the CO2 will need to be stored in what quantities, and between 2015 and 2013 at the bottom, saying 123 gigaton of CO2 will need to be captured and stored. When Dr. Fatih Birol, who's the chief economist from the IEA, was out in Canberra about 2 years ago, his response was, without CCS, reducing temperatures to 2 degrees centigrade will be nigh impossible. So, is it happening? Well, in actual fact, it's happening, not as quickly as we'd like to have it happening. This is the example of the Boundary Dam in Canada, a coal-fired power plant with CCS, which is now underway at the moment. The carbon capture and storage component of it is on the right-hand side, the building on the right-hand side of the main power station. 90% of the CO2 is being captured, and that's being used for both enhanced oil recovery and will be stored in a saline aquifer, what is not used for enhanced oil recovery. It has had significant support from both the Canadian government and the provincial government. Another more recent project is the White Rose CCS project. You can Google it on the website. The UK government is potentially putting up to £1 billion towards this project. Alstom, Drax and BOC are the proponents of it. The plan is to store the carbon dioxide out in the North Sea. It's located at the Drax power station in northern Yorkshire. IEA says that CCS is expected to be competitive, and in 2020, 2030, sure, certainly onshore wind may be a bit cheaper, but it will be competitive, as highlighted, for both ultra supercritical coal and for combined cycle gas. I'm just going to move on to Glencore's commitment to sustainable practices. I'm going to come back and finish on some of the projects we're involved with in terms of carbon capture and storage. But there's a lot of criticism of the industry and in terms of its propensity to do the good sustainable development needs so that we don't impact future generations. At Glencore, we have a strong commitment to a number of these areas that I'll talk about. But rehabilitation, it's fundamental that it be built into your mining process right from day one, even before day one, and integrated into your business. In our business, our general managers, our operation managers are on key performance indicators around rehabilitation. And that's both the quantity and the quality of what's done. And it's been that way for at least 7 or 8 years. We apply the same whether we're operating in New South Wales, Queensland, Colombia, or South Africa. It's something we discuss in our management meetings. In Australia this year, we'll do 400 hectares of rehabilitation like this here at the former Hebden and Ravensworth East mine in New South Wales and 260 hectares in Queensland. The